Well, in fact, the idea of this paper was born from a PhD dissertation which was developed by Ms. Aline Arboit, and I had the privilege to be her advisor. And at that opportunity, she analyzed all the ISCO conferences, the ISCO International Conferences, the subjects of those conferences, the themes and the subthemes, in order to establish what we can call a process of social cognitive institutionalization of knowledge organization. And in order to do that, she based her analysis on the concepts of Bakhtin. Bakhtin was a philosopher, a Russian philosopher, I would say much more than a Russian philosopher of the language, who lived in the 20th century. But his concepts were considered unknown until the 60s when the Russian theorists discovered his conceptions about the language, about the polyphony, about the dialogism. So in this sense, that we decided to verify in this opportunity in what extent Bakhtin's concept can dialogue with the social cognitive approaches of knowledge organization in order to discuss ethical issues in this field. Well, so this is the basis of our studies. We considered in one side a large tradition of social cognitive approach in our field. I have cited only some authors, but we have many other important authors who have been discussing the cultural issues, the social issues that can interfere in the knowledge organization activities. And on the other side, we considered the works which belong to the Bakhtin, with the so-called Bakhtin circle. Bakhtin circle because not only written by Bakhtin, but some of them written by his fellow Voloshinov. So the objective of this presentation is to recognize the subject, the person, that organizes and represents knowledge, the indexer, the classifier, as somebody who has an intersubjective conscience that is constantly shaped by the relationships established between the I and the other. I would say that under my point of view, this would be perhaps the most important contribution of Bakhtin, is this dialogical approach that I'm not only myself, but I am myself. I can be considered myself according to my relation to the other. So it's a totally dialogical process. Some Bakhtinian concepts. The concept of conscience. It's an unfinished social cognitive product. It's always full of signs. There is that's something I would like to sign. This constant duality between the I and the other. In some moments, it's almost impossible to identify who am I and who's the other, because the interaction is so huge, and perhaps this is the richest part of his theory. The imposition of the other with non-passivity of the I. If we consider I indexer and the other user or the other author, we'll see this dialogical process in a large way. Searches mutual answers. The subject, we can consider the indexer, has an intersubjective conscience, is shaped through the relationship with others. Sometimes we discuss what's the identity of the indexer, what's the necessary knowledge of the indexer, as if the indexer were an instance in itself. And according to Bakhtin, this figure of the indexer is built along its relationship with those other instances, the user, the authors, the institution. The subject occupies a single, unique, and irreplaceable position in the world. This is important in order to recognize the true existence of the indexer, and perhaps to refuse the naive conception of a neutrality, of a position of staying in the background. No, he's an active part of this process. Another concept is responsible act. All understanding is an answer. At the moment that I am understanding something, I'm getting some understanding from the document I'm analyzing. In a certain way, I am answering to some question that document has sent to me. Acts are responsive and responsible at the same time. So the act of indexing is not simply answering, but more than this, is a responsible answering, what incorporates an ethical dimension for sure. The responsible act comes from an evaluative and appreciative action of the I in relation to the other. As Bakhtin says, the I is built according to his relation to the other. The I cannot be considered an instance in himself. Well, some considerations about Bakhtin's concepts. The conscious is the result of an external that is internalized in a non-passive way. The non-passivity in recognizing the subject of document, the non-passivity in representing this subject, the non-passivity when choosing a tag, when choosing a term in an indexing language. The subject always positions him or herself valoratively. It's the axiological dimension of the indexer. Internal and external signs create meaning. Understanding and acting a response to others from a value judgment, which is not neutral and is socially located. When we say socially locate in a certain way, we are considering at least two important axes, the time and the space. Every I is a social construct and is dialogical because it means an answer which searches for another question or answering. My conclusion of this is that when I'm indexing, when I'm recognizing, when I'm extracting a subject from a document, I am in one side, I am answering to a demand, perhaps of the author, and on the other side of the user. But on another side, at the moment that I name this content, I'm opening doors for new other questions, sorry. Well, so now analyzing the professional who acts in KOR, I mean the indexer, under a Bakhtinian perspective. It occurs a discursive space of mediation. I always remind Antonio Garcia Gutierrez is a Spanish author, and he talks about the transcultural ethics of mediation. When we represent contents, we are mediating cultures, at least four cultures. The culture of the author, the culture of the user, the culture of the indexer, and the culture of the information system. Establish a set of dialogues between the I, as a classifier or indexer, and the other, the author, the users, and so on. But those professional acts have consequences. What kind of consequence? the no neutrality in the understanding of the other. When I recognize, when I extract subjects in a document, I have this process of understanding guided by my conceptions, my structure of life, my culture, and so on. In the production selection of representation signs, classes or descriptor, the voice of the classifier or indexer is not excluded because his or her conceptions, worldviews, and influence are always present. When Hope Olson talks about the power to name, she refers also to the power when we name it, we choose. And the act of choosing labels from an indexing language is a typical valorative act. It's not possible to simulate the inexistence or momentary turning off of the consciousness. It's really impossible. I'm all the time with my point of views, with my culture, with my beliefs, and so on. To privilege pluralism is not a neutral attitude, because sometimes the literature says we need to privilege pluralism, we need to be open to give space for different voice. But even this position, even this choice has a commitment to a certain way of thinking. It's not neutral at all. The search for meaning between the perception of the I in relation to the other deserves to be considered. The act of indexing and the products of the indexing activity, the indexes, the classification notation, so on, are influenced by external discourse, the discourse of the I and the discourse of the users, and internal discourse, the ideological and social voices that compose the conscience of who represents and organizes. And in a certain way, sometimes we feel a conflict among those discourses, because each discourse is based on a certain culture or point of view, and sometimes we have conflictive decisions to take. Assumed dialogic and dynamic representatives must correspond to the content of the documents, but also dialogue with the user community, and I would say more, also dialogue to the user community, to the author community, to the information science community, and to the professional indexer community, because every profession has, for sure, its own professional standards. Are dialogisms of language that assume the otherness of the subjects as an effect of the otherness of the social situations. The subject, the indexer, must be able to mediate different discourses and perceive the existent conflicts. And those conflicts, and he must be aware that those conflicts change in time and space. So I cannot simply recognize there is a conflict and suppose that such a conflict will never change depending on the moment. And in this sense, this conception of Bakhtin is very close to the conception of cultural warrant discussed by Claire Bakhtin. The subject must transcend his or her identity and rational limits in search of a new point of view based on the necessary interference of the other. It's not prevalence of the other. So I consider the other, but I do not deny my own conceptions. It's a totally dialogical situation, what Bakhtin calls principle of externality. Must develop his or her power to name, as proposed by Hope Olson, as a position and competence attributed by a given society. So he needs to be conscient that the power to name, it's not a power that he has by himself, but it was a power attributed, gave for a given society in order to give him power to propose surrogate of knowledge to return to that society. Must have more than a broad knowledge. I would say that more than a broad knowledge. He needs a special ability to dialogue with different communities, author, users, information systems, information professionals, and so on, in order to articulate the representative signs of all the involved voices in an exercise of an ethical attitude that allows a democratic and plural dialogue, what Bakhtin calls polyphony, without letting a voice overlay another. That's the principle, the basic principle of the concept of transcultural ethics or mediation proposed by Garcia Gutierrez in the ISCO conference in Granada 2002. Must establish an ethical relationship with the other, as discussed by Olson. Must recognize the constant change of the I. So I'll not be the same as an indexer all the time. Because my life will change, my values will change, my beliefs will change. Because the way that the indexer perceives a certain topic in a book is deeply influenced by his or her previous perceptions in this field, what we can call accumulated experience or previous experience. In such a way that the intra and the interconsistency in indexing can be difficult to read. If we consider this polyphonic conception of Bakhtin and the constant dialogue and conflict between the I and the other, it's very, very difficult to talk about inter and intra consistency in indexing. Thank you very much.